I need to pause so I can pee.
Oh, so we all going to go pee? Cool. Welcome to FANTI, beautiful people, the podcast for all those complex and complicado conversations about the gray areas in our lives. I'm Tre'vell Anderson.
And I am author, writer, professor, and your mom's fave, Jarrett Hill. We are very excited to get into a conversation about pride. What?
My mama don't know you.
Your mom loves me. We're actually really good friends, so you don't know nothing.
My mama don't know you from a can of paint.
Wow. A can of paint? Actually, that would be me. But anyway.
She don't listen to this show.
She does not. I would be Melody. She'd be like, "Excuse me, who are you?" That's hilarious. Meanwhile, my parents, I was on the phone with them this morning and they were talking about you. And my mom was like correcting pronouns with my dad. And it's they, Ben. I was like, yes. So anyway.
I love Miss Shireen.
We are going to be getting into a conversation about why pride might be for straight people. We're not exactly sure, but first we wanted to get into a conversation around some interesting data that's come out around journalism. As you know, Tre'vell and I are journalists and have been for a long time, but like as we are kind of looking at what's been happening with journalism in terms of layoffs, the ways that we've been seeing a lot of erosion in the trust of journalism, even the ways that we think about Fox News and the Dominion case and the impact that has had in the world, or that it should have had and it doesn't feel like it's had, to be quite honest. I'm curious to just kind of get some perspective from you, Tre'vell. Like, we've seen this year more layoffs in the industry than we saw at this point in 2020, which to me is kind of hard to wrap my mind around the reasoning around that when we think about terms about recession and writer strikes and ad sales and all of these different things that are happening, but also artificial intelligence, something we just talked about on this show. And I've been really concerned about it as a leader, because I think about artificial intelligence a lot, and we talked about that on the show. But I think about the ways that our jobs are not going to be coming back the same, and I'm thinking about this from the perspective of like what we're supposed to be doing as leaders, right? As people who are tasked with leading organizations that are about journalism and specifically about Black folks. I'm curious about your concerns and how you're looking at the way that the climate is kind of shaping right now.
Well, let me first say that we are in our Pass the Popcorn segment, and we are...
I'm going to choke you.
Woo.
I'm gonna strangle you like Bart Simpson with the tongue out.
I don't know that. Oh, I do know that reference. I do.
Yeah.
Don't
hold me, because that's not even one of my references. Black bastard.
Okay, there's recent data that came out. I first saw it at Axios that like prompted this conversation that over around 17,500 layoffs have happened in media this year alone, right? And they're happening at, local newspapers, right, that are shuttering altogether. But they're also happening at some of I call them the big boys, in the industry, right? Vice had a situation. They're going through a bankruptcy moment. Buzzfeed News was shut down and laid off folks. Where else? I believe, was it Forbes or Fortune or Insider, I believe, had some issues as well. But then we've also seen it extend to, beyond just the, article type of side of journalism, right? So like Spotify has done layoffs, a number of the other, streaming social media, what do you call them things?
Tech companies.
Various certain platforms, right? In which folks who do the type of work that we do have been employed, right? Have shuttered or laid people off or whatnot. I've been mostly thinking about this in a broader first and foremost, the material realities of like folks just not having their jobs. And you mentioned AI and how our jobs won't come back in the same way. They won't be the same jobs as they were before. I'm actually wondering if those jobs will exist at all, right? But not even be jobs that have been that we've been replaced by, AI operations or whatever, but just the fact that like those operations, right, perhaps not being necessary, quote unquote, with all of the technological advances and whatnot and the economic realities that we are navigating. But I think of this particularly in terms of what it means for like media literacy. If the Black newspaper, right, that has been in your community for, 30, 40 years can't keep its lights on and has to shut down, / if Gannett, decides for whatever reason that, whichever local newspaper that is under, their conglomerate of papers isn't cutting it and it closes down, what does that mean for like not only people getting the news in these smaller local communities, but what does it mean for this ongoing deterioration of media literacy, right, that is happening in our culture right now? Because so many of the issues that I see, so many of the issues I see are ultimately about media literacy, right? Like the reason why we got everybody going to the shade room and using the shade room as its news source, or the neighborhood talk, or what's the other one, Hollywood Unlocked, is because, and the reason why they're thinking and looking at those as like news outlets, even though they aren't necessarily news outlets and do not necessarily hold themselves to the journalistic, tenets that say you and I might have, is because of, they don't know where to go get the quote unquote real news, right? I'm rambling here, but my point is the closure of local news outlets. LAist is an entity that just announced that here in LA that announced layoffs. Also, the LA Times, the shrinking of opportunities for us as Black folks, especially, but folks of color more broadly, in journalism, bigger than that, to do the work that we do, are shrinking. Many of us are finding success in other platforms to like continue doing that work. But it does concern me, in terms of how we can continue to do the work that we do and hit the people that we need to be hitting.
I think about an interesting kind of moment that we've had here happen in Los Angeles with the LA Times layoffs, because you and I specifically were the folks doing advocacy at the LA Times in 2020, right?
My God, today.
And because of that advocacy and the advocacy of other groups as well, we saw changes happen at the LA Times when actually Donovan Ramsey, who we'll have here on the show in a couple of weeks, became the Black LA reporter. We saw, promotions happen at the LA Times for Black folks and brown folks as well. And we also saw Kevin Merida become the editor-in-chief, the executive editor, at the Los Angeles Times. And we saw people moving into management. And then we see layoffs happen, right? And we see that things have to move and shape in the way that they do. And then it becomes an interesting position for us to be in, for me to be in, because I'm the person who was championing Kevin in that role and like excited for him and celebrating him. He was on one of our panels celebrating him last year. And now people are mad at Kevin, right? And people that he had to lay off, or that the LA Times had to lay off. It was not just Kevin making these decisions, right? And it's an interesting position to be in, of like trying to figure out, well, like now that we've gotten some of the things that we wanted people to be in leadership positions. We wanted people to be able to move up. We wanted to have more power and control and more say at the table. And now like are tasked with decision making that isn't necessarily favorable for everyone. And I mean, there's also things about like the agreements that get made in things like in places like the Los Angeles Times, where there's a lot of last hired first fired kinds of things. And in the last few years, we've seen a lot of diverse folks come into the LA Times. And because of the ways that agreements look, that also means that like a lot of the newer hired people are the people that are going to end up going. And so as they're continuing to work out what that layoff is going to look like at the LA Times, it's been an interesting moment to figure out like how we support Black journalists, how we support journalism specifically, and how we move in these kinds of moments, because it is really important that we have all of the different things that we've been advocating for, and we have to figure out how to then move forward when in these kinds of perilous times, because things are getting worse and worse, and I don't think they're going to get better before they start getting. I don't think they're going to get worse before they get better.
Before we go, I just want to, I think it's important to be clear that when you say agreements, you're talking about union contracts that have seniority clauses. Seniority clauses are clauses that require this last hired, first fired type of setup as a means of making sure that more senior, i.e. older folks, you know, in various industries aren't pushed out simply because they're old. And I think it's important to note that because it is a complex situation, right? Discussing these issues while also looking at the economic realities, right? Like advertising is down everywhere.
Yeah.
Advertising is down on this very podcast. Okay. Right. And that impacts a lot of these decisions. Subscriptions are down, right? Everywhere for the most part.
Charitable giving this year. We talked between us about the work that we've been doing. Like charitable giving has been different this year, right? Like people are giving less in various different kinds of ways. It's been an interesting time for the economy.
And that's it, right? It's this broader economy issue, right? The inflation or whatever. If you listen to What a Day, then you are very aware of all of these particular issues. And so, you know, the thing I think for us as advocates to keep in mind is that this work is not linear. It is important that while we do this work, we also recognize the various, you know, motivations that are at play that complicate this. Because the reality is, yes, so many of these news outlets, they did their period of atonement. They hired all of these folks of color. They put, you know, folks of color in positions of power to like run things. But it's still a white institution. It's still a corporation. It's still a business.
It's still the same system, yeah.
There are always going to be issues and complications, but when we acknowledge that on the outset, right, it allows us to get to a point where, one, the people who are looking to and benefiting from the work that we're doing recognize the facts of those realities, first and foremost, while also figuring out ways to meet them where they invariably will be based on all of these, you know, realities that we're going to have to navigate. More and more folks are going to get laid off. It is a fact. And so everyone should be preparing themselves for that potential to happen. Damn. I won't get on my campaign soapbox at this point in time, but like those are the things that we should be talking about, and more broadly the impact of all of these layoffs on, I think, media literacy and information distribution, especially with the presidential election gearing up. Okay,
baby. We're gonna pause it right there. We're gonna take a quick break and get to some advertising. And even though advertising is down, we're going to get to an ad. We'll be right back getting into our conversation around Pride. Don't go anywhere. Are you craving delicious, easy meals? Well, try Wild Grain and get their baked from frozen sourdough breads, fresh pastas, and artisanal pastries delivered right to your door. Wild Grain is the first ever baked from frozen subscription box for sourdough breads, fresh pastas, and artisanal pastries. Unlike supermarket bread, Wild Grain uses slow fermentation processes that are easier on your belly. They are lower in sugar and they're rich in nutrients. And every item bakes from frozen in 25 minutes or less. Plus, for every new member, Wild Grain donates 6 meals to the Greater Boston Food Bank, so you can eat good and do good at the same time. Wild Grain has been one of my very favorite subscriptions of ours. I love all of the bread that I've had from them. I'm actually going to be having some of their pasta this week. I'm such a big fan.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, all them things about, you know, the lower in sugar and easy on your belly and the rich in nutrients, that's all fine and well, okay? But what you really need to know is that it tastes wonderful, okay? That's really what you... I'm just saying, that's all you really need to know. Plus, for a limited time, you can get $30 off the first box, plus free croissants in every box when you go to wildgrain.com/FANTI to start your subscription. You heard me, free croissants in every box and $30 off your first box when you go to wildgrain.com/FANTI. That's wildgrain.com/FANTI, or you can use promo code FANTI at checkout. Welcome back, beautiful people. So last week, or I should say week before last, okay, in our dishonorable mentions, I spoke about a feature in British Vogue of actor Ncuti Gatwa. Now, I mispronounced his name in that episode, and I said Ncuti because, you know, I just read what I saw. But shout out to Portia and everyone else who wanted to let me know I was wrong. Ncuti Gatwa, who many folks will know from the Netflix series Sex Education. He's also playing the new Doctor in Doctor Who. He's in this feature, it's a Pride feature, talking about the importance for him of having a private life and how that connects to his decision to not disclose his sexuality publicly. In a Pride feature, here's what he said. Quote, "It's a safety and mental health thing. After sex education, we all became public property to an extent. You have to fight for your right to privacy after that, but you also do feel like you owe people something. In setting my boundaries, I knew I wanted to separate the private and public, and that I never wanted my personal life to overshadow my work. I also believe that everyone is on their own journey, and it's important that no one feels an obligation to others in relation to what's happening to them internally. And that's what sex education is about, taking things at your own pace." Now, I want y'all to let that sit with you, okay? Now, this statement comes amid broader discourse in culture about folks' sexuality. I want to bring up two things, not saying that they're related, but just saying that they're happening at the same time. The other week, we spoke on the pod about Tyler James Williams's IG statement, in which he talked about the dangers of trying to figure out and speculating on people's identity, right? And then, you know, there was this situation with one of the stars of Heartstopper, which is another show on the Netflix, Kit Connor, who, in announcing that he was bisexual late last year, tweeted, quote, "Congrats for forcing an 18-year-old to out himself. I think some of you missed the point of the show." The idea there is that he, you know, was basically, he says, forced to label himself before he was perhaps ready to, because of all the speculation and conversation about his identity in relation to the character that he played on that show, right? Okay. Now, these are three separate situations. I'm not sure, as I already said, if there's a there between all three of them or not, but I felt compelled to provide that context. Now, what I really wanted to discuss here is the Ncuti Gatwa situation. There is something that I haven't quite been able to get out of my noggin and off of my spirit since I read that interview. And I mentioned it in the honorable mentions on that episode. I wanted to kind of tease it out in a very complex and complicado type of way, because it led me to this question. When did pride become for not queer people? Now, let me go a little further, because I'm being very specific in the language that I'm using there, okay? I didn't say when did pride become for straight people. I said when did pride become for not queer people. And when I talk about queer, I use queer in an umbrella, you know, sense. Because, okay, sit with me, okay? Because there is a particular, in my estimation, I gotta look at the camera directly instead of looking at you, Jarrett. There is a particular identification, explicit identification, that I feel like is present in what pride is about. And that specific identification is some sort of queer. Whichever one, you know, pansexual, bisexual, gay, you know, lesbian, you know, etc., asexual, etc., you know, all of them. Transgender, them too, you know.
All the plus.
Yeah, you know. but not people per se. And I want to be clear. I'm specifically talking about spaces in which we are platforming and talking about pride.
Mm-hmm.
Straight people, y'all can, not queer people, you can come to Pride Festival, you can come to the parade. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about this is a pride spread in British Vogue magazine. And for whatever reason, this individual cannot, does not, will not, whatever, use a label that falls under this umbrella. Why are you here? To be clear, and I'm going to let you jump in, I swear, to be clear, not dismissing the very real realities, right, that so many folks have articulated about an individual's personal journey to finding and articulating whatever language works and is appropriate for them, also in light of whatever cultural circumstances one might have to navigate. But in my head, if for whatever reason you are not able to claim a label that this feature is supposed to be about, why are you here?
I mean, it definitely begs the question of pride, right? Of pride in being able to own said label, pride in being able to show up as part of a community. I do want to, when you say not queer, I know that we talked about all of the different identities in the leg booty community, but when you say for not queer people, I'm want to get some specificity in what you mean by queer.
I thought it was very specific, but I'll try it one more time.
Well, like you say. No. You say these eyebrows, bitch. Because when you say not queer people, I think of queer as anything that does not identify as wholly heterosexual, right? If there is like a bit of ambiguity or of question or what have you, I think of that as being, shift of center and like starts to veer into queerness, right? And so I'm guessing you don't see that the same way.
I don't know what you mean there, but let me try to say something and let me know if I hit on what you hitting on. I'm not talking about the dudes who, what they call them, homo flexible or hetero flexible. It's one of those ones where like
hetero flexible, yeah.
They basically straight, but like, they like to get down every now and again. I'm specifically talking about,
I understand that.
I'm having a conversation about labels, to be clear, right? And the ability to identify publicly. However you identify, if you identify as a member of the queer community, it's less about your actual activity. I don't care what you're doing and where you're doing. It's about how you are able or are not able to identify with this like language piece that connects to activity but isn't about activity.
I think the challenge for me is about the identify publicly piece, right? Because I think that I think about how for so many years people always thought about gay people as only sexual.
Sure.
They only think about queerness or being gay as being about sex. Right. And it's like, well, there's a lot more to it than that right there. And like, we don't even have to get into into the whole list of things that are included under like how queerness works. And that is beyond just sex. But I think like the publicly identifying piece is like a social aspect that I don't really think should have any piece to do with what you are. Right. I think that like the having to like come out, because I think about Janelle Monáe. We talked about her Angie Martinez interview, and we talked about Float. I mean, we talked about The Age of Pleasure, and like in her interview, she talks about how people were saying to her like, oh, well, why didn't you tell us this sooner? Like that you're queer or that you identify this way, or the various different intersections in which she now identifies. And she's like, well, I was growing up and learning these things in public. right? And so like the need to have to identify that way in public wasn't something that I was even ready for particularly, right? And so as I see these people who are kind of like moving through that, and I would even say that like we've seen your evolution of like your pronouns and the ways that you identify and what you will and won't take, right? Like I think that evolution is still like you may be having a hard time identifying publicly in this way, right? Or growing into that. But that's why I'm asking about how you're defining this initially.
All of those things that you said about the complications around just like one's evolving identity are legitimate and are true and are valid, and I'm not taking that away from anyone. What I am also saying is stay your behind out of the pride feature.
But I think
that's specifically what I'm saying. That's specifically what I'm saying, right? Like I want to be clear. I want to be clear because this is, and I'm also coming from a standpoint of someone who has had to put together pride packages, right, for a magazine, right? If for whatever reason you have not yet, cannot yet, do not publicly identify and claim a label that falls under this queer LGBTQ pride thing, why did you and your team say yes to the pride feature that is about these labels? And what Ncuti did in their interview is talk about how pride for them is about a freedom to not identify publicly, a freedom to have a boundary between their personal and their private. And I'm just saying, it seems like pride is being rebranded again into something that is beyond what pride is supposed to be about. When Out Magazine, I worked at Out Magazine, as you all know. I was the director of culture and entertainment. I literally had to put packages together, right, of queer people in Hollywood, right? Young queer people in Hollywood who were, moving and shaking. As a publication explicitly dedicated to covering queer people and queer culture and news, if we knew that an individual had not publicly claimed any sort of label that falls under the community that we're focusing on, despite what we know personally and despite what we know in the streets,
come on,
we didn't feature them. You see what I'm saying?
I'm with you. Like, I think that making this decision is a choice, right? Like, I think that they would probably try to argue that they were having conversation about the way that queerness is showing up in culture by having this person here. But like, I think that also is probably a decision that's, I don't know who made this decision, so I'm not going to talk about them personally about their professional like decision making here. But like, I will say that I don't know. I would not have made this choice, right? To have a person that is not coming out, that is not queer, that is not saying that they're queer, but has like been a part of like a queer conversation. I get how they would argue that. I don't know that I would have handled it the same way. So I get where you're coming from on this.
I think it is important to at least ask the questions, right? Another thing that pops in my head, don't know if it's related, but I'm gonna bring it up also, is like how, all of the headliners, and I would say maybe
well, that's how we got started here in the first place.
Right. I'll just say what I was going to say, because I think I might have talked myself out of this. But what I was going to say is an observation. Like, so many of the headliners for so many of these pride festivals are straight people, supporters, allies, accomplices, all of that, but straight people. And you go to many of these festivals and events, and like, when the queer people who are also on the bill, right, but they're earlier in the day, are performing, so many of those audiences are so much smaller, right? And I don't know if that's because of the non-queer people who are coming to see that non-queer person later in the day, and who may not know or be aware of those queer people who are on, the bill prior to, or if it's us as community, as queer people who don't know, don't support, don't, want to attend, those slots of the whatchamacallit, but the audience is always, fairly different. And that's just something that like jumps out to me, also related, I think, in this conversation. But again, for me, it's about, we've also spoken on the show about, the women, the cis het women who want to have their bachelorette parties at the gay club and end up reproducing the same harms and violences that happen on them in their straight clubs on gay people in our spaces as well. Again, don't know if it's related, but like all of those things are like swirling in my head as I think about like, what does pride mean now?
I think about that because like I think about merch. I think about how pride has become like a big sale in a lot of places, and even that is becoming controversial, right? I think about how pride has become a thing of being pride has become a thing of being like outwardly supportive and like buying merchandise and being a part of a I think that can feel performative, right? Because like I oftentimes wonder like who is buying the merch, right? Because a lot of the merch for pride campaigns just tends to be ugly, just to be honest, and it doesn't feel like it's something that I would want to wear and like brandish. And I find that like oftentimes I see more like straight people wearing pride gear to show that they are supportive than I see queer people wearing it, which then makes me think about like, well, who is this for? Like, who is this marketed toward? And like, I think about it from that lens of like, why are we like centering the desires of the people who are going to be, well, I mean, it's business, right? They're going to be centering the people who would be buying it. But what about some pride wear that like looks really beautiful, but doesn't necessarily have to have a rainbow all across it, right? That can be celebratory of queer and trans people and our history and those different kinds of things. That gets frustrating to me because it makes me feel like this is more about commercialism than it is about celebrating these communities and having pride in them.
Two things that pop in my head that I just want to say really quickly before we jump to a break. Three things. The first thing is like, I'm obviously still wrestling and teasing all of this out. It literally is just something that's been in the pit of my stomach since reading that feature. And so these are fresh thoughts. Okay. So give me some grace now. Okay.
She said, don't cancel me now.
But two other things. Part of me, when I think about this, I'm thinking about like, I'm thinking about like the decision to say yes and how folks are like thinking about and showing up for the community in light of that yes, and also beyond that yes. So in this case with Ncuti, so yes, on the publication side, they have extended this offer to be featured, or this request they've asked, right? So they made a decision in terms of his inclusion, but he/his team also made a decision in terms of his inclusion, knowing the realities of his circumstance, right?
Seemingly.
Both of those decision makers in that situation, I think we have to talk about and think about. Quick story here. When I worked at the LA Times, this was during the era of Empire. Empire was just coming out. It was about to pop, or maybe it had already like just popped after it initially came out. And anybody who has followed Patrick Ian Polk's career and who has seen the movie The Skinny, you knew that Jussie Smollett was a homosexual. In culture and community, we knew that Jussie Smollett was a homosexual, but Jussie had never publicly declared this information until he did so in an interview with Garrett Kennedy in the Los Angeles Times. But prior to that moment, in community as a journalist, we had to cover it in a certain type of way because that information was not public. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Ncuti Gatwa was not in any of my work at Out Magazine. Why? Because he had not publicly identified in any particular way that would make sense for his inclusion in something. And I say that to say, we had the conversation. You know what I'm saying? And so it's both on the end of the publication, but also on the decision making, right? Because when other people whose identities have been sources of conversation over the last decade that I've been in this industry, and I, as a journalist, have reached out to inquire, I can't tell you how many conversations I have had with publicists, representatives, and actual individuals about whatever navigating they are navigating as to a reason why they not gonna end up in Out Magazine. When, last asterisk, when we have made a decision as Out Magazine, when I was there, we made a conscious decision that the only people in this issue, the only people that we are covering with the rigor, right, are queer people. This gets into a semantics of language and, you know, public identification versus private identification and all of that. But for the sake of a journalist and a publication, there is only public. You know, like that's all we can go off of without going into that space of outing and whatnot. And so I think we often just I don't want to say we don't recognize that private part, but like if you haven't said it, we can't do anything with it, and that's fine. I want to be clear. I'm done. Get me off my soapbox, please, before I get canceled.
I was gonna say we gotta get out of here. The thing that has been kind of like ringing in the back of my mind since you mentioned it was about the publicist and the decision to say yes. You and I have been in plenty of instances where we're interviewing someone where the expectation was one thing and what the interview was another, or like we expected something out of an interview and did not get that. And I also start thinking about, like, I'd love to have a conversation with the publicist about what this conversation was between y'all on why to do this. But then I'm also like, you're probably not turning down a feature in British Vogue, which is a whole other conversation.
I mean, it's a business, right? Like, yeah.
Exactly. We want to know what y'all think about all of this. You can hit us up on the social media at FANTI Podcast, on Twitter, Instagram.
And keep it cute.
And TikTok. Or don't. Drag her.
This would be the first time.
Coming up, why y'all hate us so much, and listener feedback and this honorable mentions. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
All right, class. Tomorrow's exam will cover the science of perfect pitch, the history of pride flags, and speedrunning video games. Any questions? Yes. You in the back.
What is this?
It's the podcast Let's Learn Everything,
Where we learn about science and a bit of everything else.
My name's Tom. I studied cognitive and computer science, but I'll also be your teacher for intermediate emojis.
My name's Caroline, and I did my master's in biodiversity conservation, and I'll be teaching you intro to things the British Museum stole.
My name's Ella. I did a PhD in stem cell biology, so obviously I'll be teaching you the history of fan fiction.
Class meets every other Thursday on Maximum Fun.
So do I still get credit for this?
No.
Obviously not.
No.
It's a podcast.
Dear Reading Glasses, it's been years since I've been able to read. I missed it so much, but I had no idea where to start. I felt so overwhelmed. But thanks to your show, now I'm back to enjoying books again and feeling like a reader. Love, Sarah.
Yeah, that's an email we actually answered. Okay, maybe not that email specifically, but one just like it, because most of our listeners are named Sarah.
We're Reading Glasses, and we're here to solve all your reader problems. We give advice, help you find books you love, and discuss reading without making you feel pressured.
No matter what you read or how you read it, we'll help you do it better. Reading Glasses, every week on Maximum Fun.
Welcome back, beautiful people. We are going to get into our listener feedback segment. Jarrett, you have a review here from the Netherlands?
Yeah, I just saw this. I'd be forgetting that we have reviews on Apple Podcasts, and this one, it says it's from I don't know how you would pronounce that. AphiTau. It says, I love the show. I love listening on my morning walks, giggling and shaking my head every step of the way. Big love from the Netherlands. And so pleased to see the two of you in this PCU podcast universe. Thank you.
Aww.
I be forgetting that people are listening in other countries sometimes. And so like the idea of people just like strolling down the street listening to our voices in the Netherlands was like, oh, of course that's happening.
To quote a one Candy Buress,
uh-oh.
Bitch, I'm worldwide.
Yeah. Which makes me think Beyonce, Worldwide Woman. We don't have time to get into that. Now it's time for our dishonorable mentions. These are the stories of people that got our attention this week that either deserve a call out for their good or for their stupid. I just want to call out Amy Schumer. It has a new Netflix special called Emergency Contact. I actually thought it was really good. I think Amy is funny and she does good talk show interviews. And like after it was over, you know, Netflix likes to suggest to you like other shit from Amy Schumer. And so I saw that she had a special, like a festival special with like multiple people on it. And she comes out and hosts like the first 5 minutes and then brings out the next comic. Or however many minutes it is, and then she brings out the other comics. And so I turned it on, and the first 5 minutes of what she's doing in that from 2022, all of that material is in the special that she then just put out in 2023.
Uh-huh.
And I immediately thought about Monique.
Well, now how'd she get in?
And like was very upset about it. Well, I was like, give Monique her money, right? I know whatever this lawsuit was, whatever the settlement was, it was not a fucking enough. And like watching Amy Schumer, who we know got way more money than Monique was offered, it just pissed me off in a very special kind of way. And like, I kind of like Amy Schumer, right? Like, I think she's a really good comic. I think that she does great shows. But like to see all of that material in the next Netflix special just pissed me off about Monique and her money.
Okay. No, I'm like, I mean, I get what you're saying, but I also feel like the Netflix is a joke fest thing. Like, I'm like, it is her jokes. Like,
no, it's not Netflix is a joke. It's not Netflix is a joke. It's an Amy Schumer special, right? It is an Amy Schumer special that she is hosting, bringing up other comics. If it was Netflix is a joke and she came out and did 5 minutes, that'd be a different thing. But like, it is her special.
It's an Amy Schumer special that she's bringing out other comics. So she's just like host, produce. Is it giving?
It's like Tiffany Haddish's special where she was bringing out other comics.
Yes.
Exactly like that. Exactly.
Okay, I understand.
And so I was like, no, this is you playing in our face. That's how I felt about it. But also, I'm not Netflix and I didn't write the check. I want to give an honorable mention to a friend of ours from Pop Culture Happy Hour. Her name is Aisha Harris. She has a brand new book that is out, and it is called Wannabe: Reckonings with the Pop Culture That Shapes Me. And it is also kind of a personal history similar to Tre'vell's book with We See Each Other. And it just came out on June 13th, and I'm incredibly excited for her. I just got my copy here in the mail, and so I'm going to be reading that soon. And just want to give her a shout out. If you've ever heard Tre'vell and I on Pop Culture Happy Hour with Aisha, we always have a great time discussing the things that are happening in pop culture with her. So shout out to Aisha there. I'm going to leave it there and let you take it.
Okay, I have one honorable mention this week. And it's a recommendation for y'all, okay? Oh. So over on the Peacock, there is a new movie called Praise This, okay? Now this is a movie. Now it's a straight to DVD type movie, okay? It's giving and I don't mean that negatively. I just mean that, you know, you didn't see it in the theaters for a reason, and that's okay. Okay? It's on the Peacock. It is directed by Tina Gordon, and Tina Gordon, by the way, is the woman behind the movie Little with Marsai Martin and Regina Hall. Tina also wrote Drumline and ATL back in the day. And the movie is like a Pitch Perfect meets Jacarius Johnson Productions. I don't know if y'all know who Jacarius Johnson is. Jacarius Johnson is the guy behind, you know, all of those like Set It Off Live or Two Can Play That Game Live.
No
comment. Hold
I'm
it,
leaving that.
feel it,
Yep.
process
Okay.
it. You got what I
Right.
mean. Okay.
Yep.
And so it gives, if you saw Joyful Noise, okay, the movie with Queen Latifah and Dolly Parton and Keke Palmer, if you saw Joyful Noise, it's like Joyful Noise, but like in a pitch perfect type of, competition type situation. My point is that it's really
actually
good.
I'm into that. I had a great time with that. Yeah. I'm into it.
You see what I'm saying? Okay, so it's a story about the praise and worship teams, at these different Black churches that compete, in a successive rounds or whatever. And it stars Chloe Bailey, and one of them, yes,
You could have just started right there. You buried the lead.
I know. It stars her. It stars Mac Wilds. It stars. I believe his name is Drewski. He's one of the social media people.
Okay.
But it's really good. It's really good in that, like, entertaining, humorous, it's like giving you gospel music, but to the beat of, Usher or, Cardi B or whatever. Like, it's right up my, heathen alley. And I think you all should check it out. It's called Praise This on the Peacock. Okay. And now it is time for Black History is Happening Every Day. This week, I feel like I've mentioned this name on the show before. I don't think in this particular section, but we're going to give you all a little bit of information about William Dorsey Swann, the first self-proclaimed queen of drag in this country, okay? As a formerly enslaved man from Maryland in the 1880s, Swann organized secret drag or grand rag balls in Washington, D.C. Most of his attendees were other formerly enslaved men, and they'd all gather and dance in their silk and satin dresses, not much different from today's ballroom scene. Swann was one to do a cakewalk, a dance that mimics the walk and mannerisms of a slave master. That's a little history for you all. The dance is said to have movements and expressions similar to today's voguing. Check it out. Wanted to note and share this information about William Dorsey Swann with you. One, because, I like mentioning and reminding people that, Black folks, we created all this stuff. All of the best parts of culture, we have had something to do with it. And to know that the first drag queen, right, the first person to call themselves a queen of drag, a drag queen, was a Black person, a formerly enslaved person. Like, come on now. William Dorsey Swann died at the age of 65 in Maryland in December of 1925. In 2022, the DuPont Circle Advisory Neighborhood Commission approved a resolution declaring the already existing Swann Street in Northwest Washington, D.C. to be named after William Dorsey Swann. Channing Gerard Joseph, who is a fabulous journalist and professor, is working on a book about William Dorsey Swann. And so hopefully you'll be able to get more information about him in due time.
All right. That is just about it. We want to remind y'all that the podcast We See Each Other, the podcast hosted by Tre'vell Anderson and Shar Jossell, is available wherever you get your Slay-worthy audio. The new episode is featuring Angelica Ross and Amara Jones. The final episode.
This is the final episode. Slow tier like Denzel Washington in Glory. But yes, Angelica Ross and Amara Jones are our two interviews for this very last episode. It's a longer episode than all the others because, baby, Miss Angelica Ross came with it. And I said, we're not editing. We doing the whole interview because she said what she said. Okay, so go ahead and tune into that. Okay, because trust me, you don't want to miss it.
I don't want to take too much time here because I know we gotta go. But I know that you've said that this work has been some of the most pride worthy for you. That you're most proud of this work on this podcast.
Speaking of pride. Yes, this is probably the thing that I'm most proud of creating in my career thus far. And so that's why you all should go check it out because it is wonderful, it is necessary, and that I'm glad that it not only exists in the world, but it has conversations like I was saying earlier that, I wasn't able to have or wanted to have more deeply from the book. Super proud of it, super thankful to friend of FANTI, Shar Jossell, for joining me on on that journey. Also, quick plug, Shar is doing a limited series podcast with Denver Sean of lovebscott.com called We're Just Like That. And they're recapping the latest season of And Just Like That, the Sex and the City reboot. So check that out. Give them some love as well.
And finally, our new book, Historically Black Phrases, we just got like the first copies in the mail and like are holding it. And I don't think I can show you here because I don't know if our content will be out yet with that. But like, it's very exciting. The book is way more beautiful even in person than I even thought it was going to be. And I was like very intentional about it. If you want to get a copy of the book, it is for pre-order right now. Go to historicallyblackphrases.com to pre-order and it will be available September 19th.
Yes.
That is going to do it for us. Go to fantipodcast.com for more on all of the episodes of the show. If you're watching us on YouTube, we've got 3 seasons of content that you might have missed. And so go check that out. If you have a comment or suggestion about this week's show, we're at Fanti Podcast on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Use the hashtag FantiFam, and we will check out the conversations, hopping in and see what y'all got to say. And you can email us if you've got feedback. Go to fanti@maximumfun.org.
Yes, what he said. All right. Our music is brought to you, as always, by the one and only Corece, COR.ECE, wherever you get Slay-worthy music. Also, if you are listening to this before the end of July, Corece has a show here in Los Angeles that you should check out. Go ahead and follow him on his socials to get all of that information. Our graphics are by Ashley Wynn and the folks over at Moonhouse Creative. Our editor is Anne Marie Huber, and our producer is Palmira Muniz.
That was better. Our singer-producer is Laura Swisher. This is a production of Maximum Fun.